A very blessed and happy Easter to you all. Christ is risen. He is truly risen. Alleluia. And the gospel today is taken from John chapter 20, verse 1 to 9. The same gospel we read every Easter Sunday morning since the first century. The gospel this morning from the beginning of chapter 20 in St. John invites us to follow in the footsteps of the very first witnesses of the mystery of the resurrection. And we think we know these gospels, but actually when we take a closer look at them, they're quite surprising and reveal many things about the witnesses and also who Jesus is and how he reveals the light of his resurrection in our lives. The first line of the gospel today reads, "It was very early on the first day of the week and still dark when Mary of Magdala came to the tomb." So the very first person whose footsteps we're invited to follow is Mary of Magdala. And John shows us that it's the first day of the week. This echoes back to the book of Genesis. A new creation has begun, a new week. But what's interesting here is that it was dark. And in the Gospel of John, the play on light and darkness is very strong. And it's much more than just the weather or like a cosmic darkness, but it's like a personal darkness. So Mary is in the dark. She has lost hope. She's lost maybe even her faith. And isn't it surprising that at the beginning of each of these resurrection stories, there's a lot of brokenheartedness, there's darkness, absence, shattered projects, emptiness, confusion, sadness, fear, shame, guilt. That's exactly where the light of the gospel will shine, because it's where a lot of us, we are when we read these stories of the resurrection. We are in that darkness, and that light is ready to shine in the remotest places of our own darkness as well. Jesus is risen from the dead, but they are still in their tombs. And Mary of Magdalene, she was caught up in sadness. Peter, it was guilt. We can see with the disciples of Emmaus, it was more to do with anger and disillusionment. As a group, as a community, they had a lot of fear. And Thomas, it was doubt. But we will see over the next 40, 50 days, as Jesus appears to the disciples and to the early church, he comes to meet them where they are and enlighten them in their own darkness, but also as a group and as a community and as a society. Mary of Magdala avails of the very first opportunity she gets to get close to Jesus at the first light of dawn after the Sabbath, which shows her great haste and love of Jesus. She wanted to be with him. But we see she's in darkness. Why? Because Christ is risen, but not for her. The good news is right in front of her, but she can't see it. When Mary of Magdala gets to the tomb, she sees that the huge stone at the mouth of the tomb has been rolled. And so she presumes that the body has been stolen. She uses her logic, her human logic, but human logic is very different to the way God thinks. God thinks very differently to us. Now, the rest of today's gospel is fascinating because we see that for Peter and Mary of Magdala and many others, the resurrection proof, so to speak, was depending upon an apparition. While as for John, we see it was the absence that led to the presence. While as for the others, it was the presence of an apparition that led to the presence. So John enters the tomb and sees the absence and believes. There is something really important here for us, because in our own lives, often we feel the absence of God, and we live in a world where the absence of God is spoken about. And yet for John, this very absence became a sign of the presence. When Peter and John enter the tomb, we see that what they see tells them that it was not logical that the body was stolen. Why? Because the linens were nicely folded to the side. Now, if you've ever had the misfortune of having your house stolen, robbers don't leave the house nicely folded. They leave chaos. So for John, immediately, something's up here. It's more than just a robbery or somebody coming. There's a sign for him here. So Peter enters and he goes, "Duh." And John enters and he believes. Peter gets stuck in the bizarre. It's bizarre, like we get stuck in the bizarre because he's using his logic, so to speak. But what the gospel is trying to make us connect with here, understand, is that love is quicker than logic. Love and intelligence that go together are very powerful. But pure logic makes us stupid, like the devil is pure logic. There's no love. But once there's an act of love, we see beyond the logical and see the signs of the victory of God already in our lives. Since the morning of the resurrection, things are not what they seem. We have to learn how to not trust our eyes sometimes and to move beyond the logical and to trust God. So we have to learn to look at the world from the viewpoint of the resurrection, because everything is different after the resurrection. It may seem the same, but it's not the same. My faith tells me that evil is defeated, death is conquered, that everything actually is changed in reality. So you see, the problem is that apparently speaking, nothing has changed. In my faith, I know that everything has changed. So I have to choose. Am I going to follow my logic, or am I going to follow my faith? And my faith tells me that love is victorious. Our faith tells us that we must look at reality in our lives in a different way, to look at it in the light of the victory of the resurrection. And that's how God sees us. And this is very liberating, because he looks at us from the viewpoint of victory. We are already a risen and victorious people in his eyes. So it's very key to see that, not to fall into despair, and to know that the victory has already been won.